As I clutched the eviction notice in trembling hands, a surge of dread swept over me like an incoming tide I couldn't stop. My chest tightened and a nauseating swirl of fear settled deep in my stomach. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if the ink itself carried judgment. Rent had been overdue for far too long. Each day I tried to push it from my mind, hoping for some miracle, but here it was, the end of the road staring back. At me in cold, unforgiving letters, I had nothing to give. Not a cent. Every bit of income I scraped together barely covered groceries, let alone the outrageously high rent for the apartment I stubbornly held on to, my last tether to any sense of normalcy. I pawned my belongings, begged old friends for help, maxed out every credit line I had, and still found myself standing at the edge of ruin. All my options had withered into dead ends. Mr. Langston, my landlord, had been relatively quiet. Until now, he wasn't some eccentric old man or someone you'd expect to pity you. No, he was in his late 40s, composed and carried himself like someone who always had the upper hand. His clothes, always tailored to perfection, spoke of wealth and refinement. He moved like he belonged in places I'd never even imagined. Visiting, when he knocked on my door that night, it wasn't just a sound. It was a signal. A warning. The knock was steady, confident. I froze. Some part of me knew this visit wouldn't be about extending grace or offering a payment plan. It was going to be something else. Something worse. "You know why I'm here," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. His tone was calm, polite even, but there was a firmness beneath it. A quiet finality that made my skin crawl. "I just need more time," I said. My voice tight, barely managing to keep the desperation from spilling out. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Time isn't on your side." He studied me with a kind of quiet calculation, like he already knew what I would say before I said it. Then, almost casually, he stepped inside without waiting for permission. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. He stood there for a moment, letting the weight of his presence settle into the room. "I think you understand what I mean," he said, his gaze intense but not cruel. My face flushed. Surely he was joking. I wasn't the type of woman who got caught in these kinds of propositions. But then again, desperation had a way of warping boundaries you once thought were solid. I started to protest, to say something, anything, but he raised a hand. "Just think about it," he said, with unsettling calmness. "No commitments. One night. Your debt disappears." He placed a card on the counter with a smooth motion, as though it were a business transaction and not a life-altering suggestion. Or, he added softly, "You'll need to be out by the end of the week." He walked out without another word, closing the door behind him, leaving me standing alone in a thick, suffocating silence. I stared at the card like it might burst into flames. My heart pounded. My mind raced. The next few days passed in a blur. I scoured job boards, reached out to anyone I thought might help, even briefly considered texting my ex, before remembering the betrayal that still burned. I couldn't go crawling back, not after everything. A friend jokingly mentioned sugar daddy websites over coffee. I laughed along with her. But later that night, I found myself scrolling through profiles, cheeks flushed with shame. Was it really so different from what Carter, Mr. Langston, had proposed? The thought made my stomach turn, yet the image of sleeping in my car, surrounded by whatever I could carry, was worse. The shame of that, of giving up, of having nothing, dug even deeper. Could I really survive that kind of collapse? Then came another knock. This time it was him, but not alone. Two men stood beside Carter, both tall, sharply dressed, and radiating a quiet but unmistakable power. They didn't need to speak to be intimidating. Their very presence did the job. "I can see you've been thinking it over," Carter said smoothly, that same calculated smile tugging at his lips. "Let me simplify it for you. Pay your rent and leave with a little extra. All it takes is one word." I should have slammed the door, should have screamed. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, caught in that in-between place where fear and uncertainty blur into one. My throat was dry. My hands clenched at my sides. "I don't know," I murmured, barely above a whisper. Carter tilted his head, as if amused. "Take your time. But this chance doesn't come twice." They left, and I stood in silence, their words echoing louder than any shout. I wanted to feel anger, disgust, but what I felt instead was something colder, temptation. And that terrified me most of all. What made this different from dating someone for their money? Hadn't my ex pretended to love me while lying through his teeth, sleeping with someone else the entire time? This would at least be honest. That night I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, mind tangled in guilt and logic. My pride screamed at me to walk away. But reality, brutal, unrelenting reality, whispered back, "Where would you go?" At dawn, I picked up my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. It rang once. "I was expecting your call," Carter answered smoothly, not missing a beat. Maybe I thought I could compartmentalize it, pretend it was just business, just survival. But when I walked into that expensive hotel room, I knew I'd lied to myself. Carter and the others were waiting. The air felt heavy with something I couldn't name. One handed me a glass of wine. His fingers brushed mine, a simple touch that sent a chill up my spine. "You'll get used to this," Carter said. "Don't think too much." But I was already thinking too much. As sunlight crept through the curtains the next morning, I stared at the ceiling, hollowed out. The room was silent. They were gone. A thick envelope sat on the table. Cash. More than I'd expected. My hand reached for it. My fingers closed around it. I could breathe again. Briefly. But as I looked down at the money, a sharp nausea rolled through me. I had done it. It couldn't be undone. I stepped into the shower, scrubbing until my skin turned red, but the feeling clung to me like smoke. I wanted to feel powerful and control. Instead, I felt nothing. My phone buzzed. A message. From Carter. "I trust you enjoyed yourself. Let's do it again sometime." The phone slipped from my hand like had burned me. Was this all I was now? A notification flashed again. Another message, this time from my ex. "Hey ... Been thinking about you." I laughed bitter, hollow. Of all the moments for ghosts to return, why now? And all I could feel was the weight of everything I had just traded. Yet, I found myself questioning if I had risen above that darkness at the very least. He had deceived me, stepped into this willingly. Turned a blind eye to the message. The past refused to remain hidden. In the days that followed, Carter made contact. Once more, he extends beyond him. One of his companions, as wealthy, presented a greater, some additional evenings and deeper concealment. I firmly declared to myself, newly convinced myself that once was sufficient. Here, in that moment, Carter uttered a phrase that sent a shiver down my spine. "Me wife has been inquiring Jexer's caution." The earth below me appeared to tremble. I had not even given her a thought. I had not considered the ramification shit extended beyond my own existence. At that moment, I found myself ensnared in a web far more chaotic than I'd ever envisioned. I found myself uncertain if I would emerge unscathed. Weight of Carter's warning pressed down on my heartless wife, possessed an inkling of the truth, perhaps, not all, but certainly enough to raise an eyebrow. I reassured myself, but it was not my concern yet. Beneath the surface, I was aware of the truth. Women of her kind rarely lingered in the shadows. For 2 long days drifted by in a fog of discomfort. Incessant buzzing of my phone was unrelenting. Carter here. Just touching base. His friends were extending further off. Receivery message. Irideth fragile justification I had constructed for my own sake. Endurance. Merely existing. Yet could that still hold if I continued to return? Then there was a knock at the door. This time it's not Cratera lady. With a moment's pause, I stood before the door, uncertainty gripping my at the moment. I laid eyes on her. Recognition washed over me like a tide, graceful and refined, yet beneath the surfacey a simmering intensity flickers in her gaze hour. Not the first, she remarked, crossing the threshold uninvited. And "You shall not be the final one." Words failed me. She let a hefty envelope fall onto my counter, more substantial than the one Carter had let hindsize it and vanish, or perhaps choose not to observe the consequence of my actions as I bring about his downfall. I ought to have seized a tone, ought to have expressed gratitude on their heel and never cast a glance. Behind it, there was an undeniable quality in her confidence that caused me to hesitate. What's the point of compensating me if you intend to ruin him regardless? I inquired. Her smile graced her lips, yet it failed to illuminate her eyes for the simple reason that I appreciate having choice. There is a certain thrill in observing the discomfort of men. In that moment, clarity washed over Memphis. Was not a matter concerning my own selfish, was a matter of power concerning the concept of control concerning the act of diminishing Carterdo, the same insignificance he had imposed upon her. For the first time since this began, I experienced an emotion beyond mere feardo, and I insisted nudging the envelope toward him. Once more let the truth come to light. Her smile blossomed. In that instant it dawned on me that she had already begun a week. Later the scandal erupted. Carter's enterprise collapsed. His name was sullied and tarnished. A greater number of women stepped into the light. The idyllic existence he had meticulously crafted crumbled before his very eyes. I gathered my belongings and departed swiftly, ensuring he wouldn't have the chance to seek me out. I ought to have experienced a sense of liberation. It ought to have felt as though victory was Mania's. I settled into my new apartment to stamp from the chaos. A notification illuminated my phone request for a message. The name evoked a sense of strangeness. Yet the words resonated with familiarity. A new opportunity was knocking, tempting me once more. My finger lingered just above the screen. I had gained wisdom through experience under the destination of this path, and yet I chose not to erase it.